Something quiet to close the evening, Marchant. Nothing that will keep the punch bowl waiting. Mr. Osric Fell said it the way a man dismisses a coat he has decided is not worth hanging up. And he said it in front of 40 of us. And he said it without once looking up from the little watch he kept snapping open and shut in his waistcoat pocket. I was standing by the Atlas stand with my tea going cold, and I remember thinking that I had never heard a kindness delivered with so little kindness in it. I am Ambrose Tull. I had been a solicitor in this market town for 38 years before I put my nameplate away, and in all that time, the Lending Library reading room had been my second parlor. I knew every crack in its plaster, every patron who came for the newspapers, and every patron who came for the quiet. And I knew Effie Marchant, who had shelved my returns and found my spectacles under the periodicals table more times than either of us cared to count. For she had worked there since she was 16, dusting spines and stamping due dates, and 20 now, still in the same gray woolen dress she wore to make herself invisible among the shelves. The reading room had been made over for the occasion in the library's own modest fashion. The long oak tables where I usually spread my newspapers had been pushed back against the shelves and draped with white cloth borrowed, I suspected, from the vestry, and upon them sat plates of seed cake and a great cut-glass punch bowl that caught the lamplight and threw it about the ceiling in trembling gold coins. Every oil lamp in the building had been trimmed and lit and set along the shelf ends so that the gilt titles on the spines glowed faintly where the light fell across them, and chairs of every mismatched sort, vestry chairs, kitchen chairs, one good chair from Mr. Fell's own office, had been arranged in loose rows facing the corner where the old upright stood. It was, I remember thinking, a pleasant enough room for an ordinary evening, and I had not yet understood that it was about to become something else entirely. That evening was the third of the Library Board's autumn recital series, an idea Mr. Fell had championed himself the previous spring, an hour of improving music once a fortnight, to draw the town's better families through the doors, on evenings when the newspapers alone would not. He had engaged a fiddler from the assembly rooms for the opening night, and a choir of schoolchildren for the second, and for tonight he had planned nothing at all, having assumed, I think, that the room itself, and the punch, and the pleasant conversation would suffice. It was Mrs. Prine, the head librarian, gray-templed and formidable, who had pointed out at the last moment that an hour of standing about with nothing but biscuits was no kind of program, and it was Mrs. Prine who had suggested, in her mild way, that Effie might play something on the old upright in the corner, the one that had sat there so long and so neglected that most of the board had forgotten it was an instrument and not a piece of furniture. Fell had frowned at the suggestion, the way he frowned at any suggestion that had not first occurred to him, but he had no better one at hand, and so he consented, and that was how we came to the moment by the Atlas stand, with Effie standing very straight in front of the whole assembled board and the whole assembled town, her hands folded at her waist, and Mr. Fell delivering his instruction as though it were an act of considerable generosity. "Something quiet," he said again, in case the room had not properly absorbed his indulgence. "We don't want anything showy, just enough to see the evening off pleasantly." A ripple of soft laughter went round some of the younger board members. Not cruel exactly, but not kind either. The laughter of men who have already decided how a thing will go, and are pleased with themselves for deciding it. Young Greaves, the solicitor's clerk, leaned toward his neighbor and murmured something about hoping the punch would not go flat before the last chord. And though he kept his voice low, it carried, as such remarks are always contrived to carry, and 2 or 3 of the younger wives near the fire screen hid their smiles behind gloved fingers. It was not malice precisely. It was worse in its way, being the ordinary carelessness of people who had simply never thought to wonder what a quiet young woman behind a returns desk might be capable of, and had therefore never troubled themselves to find out. I watched Effie's face, and I confess I expected to see it fall, the way a young person's face falls when the room has told her, gently and publicly, precisely how small she is meant to be. But it did not fall. Something in it went still instead, the particular stillness of a person setting down a weight they have carried a long while and finding, to their own surprise, that they are glad to be rid of it. "Yes, Mr. Fell," she said, "something quiet." And she walked to the piano, the way she walked to any shelf she meant to tidy, without ceremony, though I noticed, because I had watched her for 4 years across the returns desk and had come to notice such things, that her chin was very slightly higher than usual and her shoulders very slightly back. What none of the board knew, and what I alone in that room might have guessed, having caught her at it a dozen times through the high glass door of the reading room after closing, was that Effie Marchant had been playing that neglected upright for 3 years in every hour the library allowed her, the slow hour after the doors closed, the slower hour before they opened, learning by ear and by borrowed sheet music and by a battered tutor book left behind by some forgotten patron, teaching herself in secret because there had never been money in her family for lessons and never been reason, in anyone's accounting but her own, to think she deserved them. I had once asked her, catching her at the keys one evening as I collected an overdue volume, what she had been playing, and she had gone scarlet and said only that it was nothing, only something she was working out, and I had let the matter drop because I did not wish to embarrass her. I wished now, watching her cross that room, that I had asked a great many more questions. I recalled, standing there, one particular evening the winter before, when I had lingered past closing to finish a chapter I had no business finishing, and had heard, faintly, through the door to the reading room, a sound I took at first for the wind working at a loose casement. It had not been the wind. I had gone as far as the glass and looked through, and there she was, alone among the shelves with only a single candle for company, her coat still buttoned to the throat against the evening chill, working some slow passage over and over, with a patience I had rarely seen in anyone, young or old, at any task whatever, stopping, frowning, returning to the same 4 bars, coaxing them a little nearer to what she wanted each time. I had not disturbed her. I had gone home instead, and thought no more of it than a man thinks of any small, curious thing glimpsed through a lit window on a dark street, and it shames me a little now to admit how easily I let it pass from my mind. She settled herself on the piano stool, straightened her skirts with the same brisk economy she used for straightening a shelf of misfold novels, and set her hands upon the keys. The room had not gone quiet for her. It was still murmuring with the low sociable noise of 40 people who expected to go on being sociable through whatever came next. Mr. Fell already half turned toward a trustee beside him to resume some conversation about drains. Then she began, and the noise did not stop all at once. It stopped the way water stops boiling when the flame beneath it is drawn away, a little at a time, and then entirely. The first notes were so soft I thought at first she had only touched the keys by accident, feeling for the right ones. They rose and fell in a slow, drifting figure, unhurried, almost hesitant, like a question asked of no one in particular, and I recognized nothing of the fiddler's reels, nor the schoolchildren's carols in it. This was something else altogether, something with a long, dreaming line to it that seemed to open the room out rather than fill it. Mr. Fell's trustee stopped speaking mid-sentence. Fell himself, whose watch had been halfway back into his pocket, left it suspended in his hand, and did not finish putting it away. I did not know, that evening, that what she was playing was Debussy's Reverie. I learned the name from her only weeks later, when she told me, with the same scarlet blush as before, that she had found the piece copied out in a periodical that had come through the returns desk 2 winters past. A French journal some traveling scholar had donated to the library and never reclaimed, and that she had spent the better part of a season teaching her hands to find their way through it by candlelight after the doors were locked, playing it so many times into the empty shelves that she no longer needed the page at all. She played it now from memory, in a room full of people who had told her, not an hour before, that nothing she did could possibly be worth their full attention. The melody unfolded like something remembering itself, rather than being performed. A long, unhurried breath of a tune, rising into a soft ache and settling back, rising again, a little further each time, the left hand laying beneath it a slow, rocking foundation, like the tide turning under a boat at anchor. Her hands were not the hands of a trained performer. There was no showy carriage to her wrists, no theatrical lift of the fingers between phrases. They simply went where the music told them to go, unhurried and certain, the way a person walks a path they have worn smooth themselves in the dark. Old Dr. Wexford, who sat near the fire screen and who I had never once seen without his newspaper folded ready in his lap, let the newspaper slide unnoticed to the floor. Miss Calloway, the draper's daughter, who had come only for the punch and the company, set her cup down on the nearest shelf without looking at it, her eyes fixed on Effie's hands. Even the youngest board member, a solicitor's clerk named Greaves, who had laughed loudest at Fell's little joke, had gone entirely motionless, his mouth very slightly open, as though the laughter had been drawn back out of him and something else put in its place. The piece climbed toward its heart now, the melody rising through a passage of aching, searching chords. Effie's whole upper body leaning very slightly forward, as though she were listening for the music, rather than making it. Her eyes half closed, her lips pressed together in the particular concentration I had seen 100 times over a difficult catalog entry, except that here, it had become something closer to prayer. The old upright, which I had always privately considered a poor, tired instrument, wheezy in its middle register and flat in its bass, seemed for those minutes to forget its own age entirely, filling that book-lined room with a sound so full and so warm that I found myself, a man of 38 years' careful professional composure, obliged to press my handkerchief rather firmly to my eyes. I have turned that passage over many times since in my memory, trying to account for what made it so, and I believe it was this. She did not play the piece as a thing to be got through, the way a schoolgirl gets through a recitation, watching always for the safe far shore of the last bar. She played it as though each phrase had only just occurred to her, as though the ache in it were freshly discovered rather than merely reproduced, so that a piece I have since heard rendered ably enough by trained hands in finer rooms has never once moved me as it moved me that evening, played on a tired library upright by a girl who had taught it to herself in secret by candlelight, because she loved it and because, I think, it had never once occurred to her that loving it might not be allowed. She brought the melody to its highest reach, held it there a breath longer than seemed possible, and then let it fall away, note by note, gentler and gentler, the rocking figure beneath it, slowing like a clock winding down of its own accord, until the last chord hung in the lamplight and dissolved into nothing at all, and the room sat in a silence so complete I could hear the coal settling in the grate. No one moved for the space of 3 long heartbeats. Then Dr. Wexford began to clap, awkwardly, from his seated position, and Miss Calloway's hands flew together, and within moments the whole room was on its feet. Chairs scraping back, biscuits forgotten, 40 people applauding a market town library assistant in a gray woolen dress, as though she had descended from a concert stage in the Capitol, rather than risen from a stool behind the returns desk. Effie sat very still through the first of it, her hands folded again in her lap exactly as they had been folded when Fell gave his instruction, and I saw her throat move once, hard, before she found the composure to rise and offer the room the smallest, most startled curtsy I have ever witnessed. I looked, as everyone in that room eventually looked, toward Mr. Osric Fell. He was not applauding at first. He was standing with his watch still in his open hand, forgotten, staring at the piano, as though it had been switched in the dark for some finer instrument entirely. And when he did at last bring his hands together, it was slowly, almost uncertainly, a man clapping his way back into a room he had briefly left. When the applause finally quieted, he did not resume his conversation about drains. He crossed the reading room himself, past the atlas stand, past the fire screen, until he stood before the piano stool where Effie still sat, and the whole room watched him do it, and I confess I watched with no small satisfaction, having endured his little joke as much as anyone. "Miss Marchant," he said, and his voice had none of the watch-snapping briskness left in it. "I asked you for something quiet." He paused, and for a moment I feared, despite everything I had just witnessed, that the old institutional condescension would reassert itself, that he would find some way to make even this a small thing. But he did not. I did not ask for that. I would not have known to ask for that. I am obliged to you for giving it to me regardless. It seemed a fitting way to close the evening, sir, Effie said, and there was no daring in it, no triumph, only the plain, steady honesty of a young woman who had simply told the truth as she understood it. Fell looked at her a long moment, and then he turned to the room, to the board members still standing about with their punch cups forgotten, and I watched him do a thing I had not, in 11 years of sitting on committees with the man, ever once seen him do. He admitted, in front of witnesses, that he had been entirely wrong. "I have been coming to this library for 20 years, he said, "and I did not know what was kept in it. I proposed this recital series to bring music into this room. I find the room had music in it the whole time, and I very nearly sent it home unheard." He turned back to Effie. "The board will want to speak with you, Miss Marchant, about lessons. Proper ones, with a proper master, and paid for properly, and I should like to see this library own an instrument worthy of what you have just done to that one." He glanced, almost fondly now, at the tired old upright. "It has served long past its wages tonight. Let it retire with honor." There was more discussion after that, as there always is once a board has been roused to feeling something. Pledges made on the spot. Dr. Wexford offering a subscription toward a proper grand before the week was out. Mrs. Prine standing quietly by the shelves with an expression of vindication she was too dignified to voice aloud. Within the month, a master had been engaged to come out from the county town on Thursdays, a patient gray-whiskered man named Hollis, who declared within 3 lessons that he had rarely taught a pupil who listened so completely, and by the following spring, a proper grand piano stood where the old upright had wheezed its last, a gift of the board's own subscription with Mr. Fell's name recorded first upon the plate, though he was careful, when Mrs. Prine wished to make a small ceremony of it, to insist that the plate ought to bear Effie's name instead, and so it does to this day, engraved in small, careful letters beneath the fallboard, where only those who go looking will find it. But I remember best the smaller moment that came after, when the crowd had thinned and Effie was gathering her shawl to walk home, and I found myself beside her at the door, as I had found myself beside her at that door 100 ordinary evenings before. "You never told me it was reverie," I said. "I never thought anyone would care to know," she said, and smiled, and for the first time in 4 years of knowing her, I saw that smile reach all the way to her eyes. I walked home slowly that night, past the darkened shop fronts and the gaslit corner where the market square gave onto the church lane, and I found I was in no hurry at all to reach my own quiet rooms, because I wanted a little longer to hold the sound of it, that unassuming girl at that tired old piano, filling a room that had told her she was not worth its full attention, until every soul in it forgot entirely how to sit still. I have heard finer instruments since, in finer halls, played by musicians with considerably grander reputations. I have never once heard anything that moved me as that evening did, and I do not expect, whatever years remain to me, that I ever shall again.